Ethan Iverson, thank you very much for accepting my request for this interview. You are a pianist, a composer, a arranger, an educator, a critic, a writer, and a husband. And what else are you?
That probably covers it.
Okay. And you were born in Wisconsin in 1973, and you moved to New York in 1991, where you live still in Brooklyn. How is it in Brooklyn for you?
I love New York. I love the people. It's still probably got the greatest number of master jazz musicians sort of nearby. So I'm happy to be there.
Okay. Well, please tell me how and when you realized that music will become a serious professional activity in your life.
I think I always liked the music that I heard on the television. If it was Henry Mancini, like the Pink Panther, or the John Barry scores to the James Bond films. And it wasn't jazz, but it was the echo of jazz. And that's what I always responded to. And eventually I sort of figured out how to play it a bit myself.
And did you had musicians in your family? Did you have a piano in your home place, or?
There weren't musicians in my family, or at least my immediate family. My mother got me a piano when I was banging on a piano at the preschool, so thanks, Mom.
And then you started to play at home on the piano.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the early years in New York for you, before you started with the Bad Plus, you played in dance classes, and comedy sparks, and theater spots, and you started also to play in the New York Tango Trio. And then you became also the musical director at the Mark Morris dance group. Please tell me a little bit about your early experiences and influences.
Well, there are so many, and so many musicians I admire, and I've gotten to play with some of my favorite musicians. But Mark Morris, you just mentioned Mark Morris. That was extremely important. He's one of the great choreographers of all time, and I was became intimate with his work and got to see it on the road every night for 5 years, and I think really exposed me to the idea of art outside of jazz. I was very much just inside being a jazz pianist, and then with Mark it opened me up in a different way. So that was particularly crucial. I managed somehow in my early sort of jazz years, I got to play with Dewey Redman a little bit. That was very important. Later on, I started writing about the music partially because of Dewey. When I met Dewey as a teenager still, and made this little record with him, we did a couple of gigs. Dewey told such incredible story about jazz. And I thought, this is amazing. I had everything I read, everything I thought is wrong. But listening to Dewey actually tell these stories, this is right. And after the Bad Plus had our success, I sort of thought, maybe I should go find Dewey and talk to him and try to get some of those stories for the record, because I knew they weren't on the record. And I was thinking that, and then he died. And I thought, oh geez, I blew it, I didn't get to Dewey. So the next week I took my tape recorder out to Billy Hart's house and began the long series of Do the Math interviews. There are over 40 at this point, of mostly people that are jazz masters. Also in the 90s, there was a little bit of a scene. I got to see Mark Turner and Kurt Rosenwinkel play all the time with Ben Street and Jeff Ballard. That was very influential. I've gone on to play with all those guys a fair amount, especially Mark and Ben. And Jorge Rossi was very important. Jorge and Reed. Then Reed moved to New York. There is still a great tenor player, Bill McHenry, I played a lot with, and an elder drummer, Jeff Williams. There was a kind of, for me, a very powerful scene. All these great musicians, and they're all very influential to me in terms of setting some sort of aesthetic guidelines in terms of jazz practice.
Yeah, well, you studied with Fred Hersh, with Sophia Rosoff,
Right.
and with John Bloomfield.
Right.
Explain, please, your choice to study with them and what did you learn? Can you also describe them a little bit in their personality and how they were teaching?
A record I got when I was very young was Saraband by Fred Hersh with Charlie Haden and Joey Barron. I really liked this record and the way the piano player Fred Hersh played on it. In retrospect, I also really liked hearing Charlie Haden in a trio context, sort of like a conventional trio. Charlie plays incredible on that record. Fred sounds great. The drummer, Joey Barron, also sounds great. Great record. When I got to New York, I saw Fred Hersh play, and I enjoyed it. And someone somewhere said something about him being a good teacher. And I knew I needed to keep growing, so I hit him up for lessons. And they were great. He was the first person to really talk to me about piano technique. In my younger years, I didn't have anybody that helped me with technique, and I really had almost no piano technique. So Fred sort of took me by the hand and said, okay, kid, here, let me show you some things about how you touch the piano, how you relate to the piano with your whole body. I would say that those names you just mentioned, Fred Hersh, Sophia Rosoff, and John Bloomfield, the point is to really have the whole body engaged while playing the piano. You don't want to play the piano just like a typist, just the periphery. You need to be in the swing of it with your whole body. That's the point of the teaching. After I got to a certain point with Fred, he sent me to Sophia Rosoff, who was the disciple of Abby Whiteside. Abby Whiteside was a mid-century piano guru who had really advanced concepts about holistic ways of playing the piano. A lot of it is, I think, pretty conventional wisdom at this point, but at the time of Abby's writing and when she wrote her books and stuff, she died in the 50s, terribly young. It was still quite revolutionary, I think, to be thinking of the piano in those terms. Around the same time Whiteside was finishing her career, the woman Dorothy Taubman was starting hers, and I think Abby Whiteside and Dorothy Taubman actually have a lot in common, although disciples of one or the other don't think so. But I've been exposed to both, and after Sophia stopped teaching, she passed away a couple years ago, but before that she was elderly and she stopped teaching. I decided I needed a new coach, and I had heard about John Bloomfield and the Golansky technique. That's a version of the Dorothy Taubman technique. And I guess I would say, like, very quickly that Abby Whiteside they share so much, but Abby Whiteside goes a little deeper into emotional connection and rhythm as a player, and Taubman and her disciples go further into the raw technique of the piano playing. And between them, I feel like if I keep working at it, I'll eventually be able to play anything I want.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. You worked 17 years with the Bad Plus. That was between 2000 and 2017. How bad were you really? I mean, how did you create that name?
Dave, the drummer, Dave King, came up with the name. It didn't mean anything other than that hopefully it was memorable.
Well, it is.
Okay.
For sure.
Good.
Well, you recorded at least 14 albums, so far I could see. Please describe your time inside the Bad Plus. What did you wanted to do, especially in this band at the beginning, maybe? And what were your expectations and how did it went?
Well, I think I always wanted to play some music that I'd never heard before. when I was in my 20s, I was very concerned that I play in a personal fashion, that I not play like anybody else. And I remember this first time we played a little rehearsal with Reed Anderson and Dave King. I was already playing with Reed a bit in New York. But then we went back and played a gig with Dave, and I just remember this first rehearsal like, wow, this is a sound. I never heard this before. Dave had been doing projects where instead of someone's quartet or someone's trio, there was a band name, which I think makes a lot of sense in that most of the music we really love in the small group jazz tradition is quite democratic. It says on the album John Coltrane Quartet, but without McCoy Tyner and Jimmy Garrison and Elvin Jones, it's not the same sound. So Dave said, well, instead of the Ethan Iverson trio, let's call it the Bad Plus, and I thought that was a great idea. And I think we played one gig as the Ethan Iverson trio, and it felt really good, and then Dave proposed that band name, and we made a little album. I mean, I could tell that the audiences were responding strongly. But still, I was surprised when we broke through the way we did in 2003 with the Columbia Records release, These Are the Vistas, which sold 100,000 copies. This was right before file sharing. The second album, Give, I remember people coming up to me and saying, oh, yeah, I burned your CD for my friend. So that was that. It was the end of the record industry. Yeah. But we got the last gasp of the old record industry. And they poured money into us. It was an expensive record to make, and we were on the covers of jazz magazines and, quite controversial, I guess. And I found the controversy really kind of thrilling because all my heroes were controversial, or so many of them were. And so I thought, wow, this is amazing that I'm getting to be controversial as well. Then for many years, we toured a lot. We on the road almost half the year every year for 17 years, and it was a great living and a great thing to be out there. At some point, it's hard to stay on the same page with people, and I ended up feeling like I was in a marriage that wasn't functioning, just like sometimes you gotta have a divorce because it's just not working interpersonally. So I left. I wanted to just have the band quit. I thought we should just play, maybe make one more record, do a final big tour, say yay, and call it quits. They came back and said they really wanted to protect the Bad Plus name and keep using it to keep playing, and I felt like I couldn't tell them no.
Okay, well, inside the Bad Plus, you recorded an album called The Rite of Spring, with music arranged for the Bad Plus, of course, from Igor Stravinsky. Can you please explain me a little bit about the work process, and are you happy with the result?
The booking agent we were working with told us that Duke University was interested in commissioning a big project, a big cover, because we were known for our rock covers, playing Iron Man by Black Sabbath and Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana and this sort of thing. And on our album For All I Care, we did a couple of classical music covers. We played a small piece of Stravinsky, a small piece of Milton Babbitt, and a small piece of Georgi Ligeti. So Duke, this wonderful person, Aaron Greenwald at Duke University, said to our booking agent, I like the Bad Plus, I like them playing this classical music. Could Duke University commission them to do a big project? And booking agent reported that in, and we said, well, yeah, maybe. And the booking agent then suggested, well, what about the Rite of Spring? And that was a good idea because it's sort of the most famous piece of modernist classical composition. There's nothing more famous, I would say, in terms of, 20th century classical music that has an edge to it. Probably Rhapsody in Blue is more famous, I don't know, but we couldn't cover Rhapsody in Blue and feel comfortable, but Rite of Spring felt like, okay, we can give it a try. And I'm a big Stravinsky fan. In my 20s, I went through everything. I listened to all of Stravinsky and have a lot of the scores. I went to see Gergiev conduct Stravinsky one time, actually, the double bill, Oedipus Rex and the Rite of Spring, and I remember feeling I much prefer Oedipus Rex, even though the Rite of Spring is more famous. So it was fun to work on the Bad Plus Rite of Spring because I really learned the piece and I really learned how great it was too. It holds up. It's definitely a masterpiece. But it was not my favorite Stravinsky piece when I started.
Okay. Well, you are attracted to many different styles of music. You mentioned already pop and rock bands. I want to mention Radiohead, Nick Drake, Pink Floyd, Stravinsky, Charles Ives, Bud Powell, Schoenberg, the Beatles, just to mention a few. Also Thelonious Monk and Ornette Coleman, of course. And you integrate many different influences in your music, which says you have to be enormous flexible in your way. How do you work with all these influences? What is the magic for you to work with all this material?
One of my favorite artists is the director, writer, filmmaker, and TV person, Joss Whedon. And particularly, I love him for the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And he said something in an interview. He said, there's no new ideas. There's just fresh ways to put old ideas together. And when I first heard that, I said, that's not true. Come on, there's new ideas all the time. And then as I thought about it, the more I came to the conclusion that he's right. I mean, maybe once in a while there's a new idea. But of all those names you just said, if I know any of those artists, I can tell you who they're made of. Thelonious Monk is made of certain elements.
Yeah.
He's made of Duke Ellington, James P. Johnson, sentimental parlor love songs, classical music like Debussy. He's made of these elements that he put together to be Monk. Even though he's the most idiosyncratic jazz pianist in a way, at the same time, he is, just like everybody, a fresh way of combining old ideas. Ornette Coleman. Boy, no one's more avant-garde than Ornette Coleman. The truth of the matter is, he's a Texas bluesman. He plays the Texas blues on the alto saxophone, inspired by Charlie Parker. But he's got this kind of modernist ethos that really connects to the 50s. And when he got to New York in the 60s, he heard classical music, and so he immediately started playing violin, noise violin, to make it more like classical music. Then the 70s happened, and he put rock music in there with Prime Time. He was always grabbing whatever there was and putting it together in a new way. So, okay, here we are in essentially the postmodern age now, and all of us in this art game have to figure out what's left to combine, what hasn't been done, how can we still sound fresh. And in the Bad Plus, I would say there was really two or three elements that felt notably fresh. There was indie rock, where we're an acoustic piano trio, we're not going to have any synthesizers, we're not going to have any guitars, no electric bass, but we're going to play like indie rock musicians sometimes. We're going to use minimalism, Steve Reich and Philip Glass. We're going to take that in, we're going to put that in our music. And then there's that Keith Jarrett music with Dewey, Redman, and Charlie Hayden and Paul Motion. That we really loved. that was something we could agree on. So when I think you listen to These Are the Vistas, and you think about those three references, minimalism, indie rock, and Keith Jarrett with Charlie Hayden, Paul Motion, and Dewey Redman, that's kind of the sound of These Are the Vistas. It is fresh, I think. I heard that not too long ago. I'm like, man, this is fresh. But it was a mixture of those things.
Yeah.
You got to try to go deep in any of these things. It can be too easy to put stuff together under the rubric of something like diversity, for example. A good example is if you ask a string quartet to play a hip-hop number, we all sort of know that's not going to work unless the string quartet really works hard, unless it really goes deep, which it hardly ever does. So I guess in my own little practice, I appropriate Ornette Coleman, but I've really thought about Ornette. I appropriate Charles Ives, but I've definitely thought about Charles Ives. Anybody else I'm checking out, I've tried to go deep on any of them. And so that when I assemble the pieces, it has some solidity. And I actually think that's why it can be still fresh, is how deep you go on any of these references.
Yeah. Well, I'm coming back to some other influences, but you mentioned Thelonious Monk as an influence for you. And somehow we can hear this in your often also percussive way of playing the piano, especially in the Bad Plus. Mm-hmm. Please explain your influence. Why does it attract you so much to play so much percussive?
Well, the piano is a percussion instrument. And a lot of jazz pianists seem to want to pretend they're classical pianists. They're like, I want to create an envelope of sound that's like a classical pianist. I'm interested in that too, to some extent, but if you're up there with a drum set, I'd rather try to meet the drums on the stage more than the classical musicians. So I think that's the reason to be percussive.
Okay. Well, do you rehearse a lot, and how do you rehearse?
Well, I practice a fair amount. Well, the Bad Plus Rite of Spring, we had to rehearse that a lot. Other things varies, but jazz musicians can also get together and play wonderful concerts with no rehearsal whatsoever. So it really depends.
Mm-hmm. What do you like to practice? How do you work with your fingers and your hands to stay flexible?
Probably all jazz pianists play some Bach. We have forever. Probably all jazz pianists play some Chopin. We have forever. There have been far more jazz pianists that played some Bach and Chopin than those that didn't. So I try to keep those in rotation.
Okay.
Then, I practice the blues and rhythm changes and that sort of stuff, just like most jazz people. So I've had these teachers, I keep on working this. There's hardly anything I play that is just a technical exercise. I know some pianists like to play a bunch of Czerny and Hannon and stuff. I never did any of that, and I sort of don't believe in it, frankly. There's too much good music to play that'll give you the same focus. Okay.
And do you still shake hands with people, or do you have to be careful with your hands and fingers?
I shake hands.
Okay. We'll talk about that in 20 years again.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Well, how was the first moment you touched the piano? Just in a performance like that. How is that for you?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that exactly. It depends on so many factors. But I will say I'm not fussy about the piano. I try not to be. Because my heroes include as you say, Bud Powell and Thelonious Monk, and they made such great music on any old piano. So I try to just accept the instruments and, I'm sure any jazz pianist can say they've had great gigs on a terrible piano and bad gigs on a perfect piano. There's so many other factors. Yeah.
Okay. Well, when you meet a person for the first time, do you feel this person is maybe a musician? Can you feel this? And if, how is this possible?
Sometimes I ask fans if they're a musician, and I can't guess whether they are or not usually.
So it stays a mystery for you?
I think so.
Okay. Well, when did you went to a concert just for fun for the last time? And what was that for a concert?
I go out to see music when I can. I think the last thing I saw was just maybe a week ago in New York. I went to the New York City Ballet, and there was live music, including a Bach cello suite and orchestral music of Glinka and Bartók's Fifth String Quartet, and a pretty mediocre piece of a famous Balanchine ballet by Hersh K of traditional American songs. So that was the most recent live music I heard.
Okay. And was it a beautiful, successful evening for you?
It's a great show, yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
Well, you are here in Zuidhorn in the Netherlands at the moment on a festival it's called Gast, and you are an artist in residence. Please explain what you do here.
For some reason, we take over the town every 2 years, a bunch of jazz musicians, and do a whole bunch of intermingling amongst each other in order that we perform all day long in people's gardens. They build little stages for us, and we have, 15 or 16 great Holland jazz musicians playing in different groups all afternoon long, and then a couple of student groups, and then in the evening is sort of this highlight concert with an orchestra, full orchestra and full jazz band, of which there are original compositions by one by me, and my co-curator is Marika van Dijk, and she's a wonderful alto player, composer, and arranger, and she's doing a lot on the concert. There's an original piece of hers and an arrangement she did for this wonderful singer, and one other arrangement. And we'll be playing as well on that final concert. So it's one day, but it's a action-packed, fun-filled day here in Jazz to Gast.
Okay. Well, you arrange also music and compose music for small ensembles inside, and also for string quartet, I think. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
On Saturday, the only real piece I'm doing with my name on it is this orchestral piece called Sol for X. But I'm in a trio with Josephine Bode and Dodo Kiss, the two great avant-garde recorder players from the Netherlands. We've played before, and we have this piece of music that we've arranged from very old sources. Composer's name is Bernardi, and we actually had sort of a great gig at the Moors Festival last year with it, and I was pleased when I could invite them back to do at least part of it. And each of the small group sets are just half an hour, so we had an hour at Moors, so I'll have to cut a little bit of it, I guess, but it'll still be really fun.
Okay. Well, I'm looking very much forward to see you Saturday and to hear you Saturday, of course. Well, you are very successful in your work with many projects, concerts, clinics, and so on. How is it for you to be embraced with open arms and hearts through people you actually don't know at first sight? Do you feel like being in love somehow? Or how is that for you?
I'm very grateful that I don't have to work for a living. You know, I sort of do what I want somehow for a long time now. But, you know, I don't, you know, you play a lot of gigs and you just hope that the audience digs it, you know. I don't know if I can say more about a relationship with an audience more than you do it. You do what you do as well as you can and hope they dig it, really.
Okay. Well, you also travel a lot. What are you doing most of the time while you're sitting many hours in planes?
That's when I started writing about the music, was all the travel time, all the time that's dead unless you're doing something. And I think everybody that goes on the road a lot starts having a hobby or some kind of personal project. And my personal project became the writing.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about how you compose? Is there a ritual you are following when you start on the white piece of paper? Do you always start with zero, just with a blank idea? And how do you decide what is good and what is not?
It's very hard for me to imagine composing without a piano. I'd like to play something on the piano. If I can come up with one fresh idea, then the rest is sort of easy. That first fresh idea is the hard part. Something charismatic, something that you know you've never heard it before, not like that. Mm-hmm. So far, when I've needed to compose, it was never difficult. This piece for orchestra, I wrote it very quickly. And I know it's successful. It's got a nice tune and everything. People like it. So, yeah, well, knock on wood. We'll see if that keeps happening. But so far, you know, a deadline, if you've got a deadline and a commission, I can do it. So far, no problem.
Yeah. And do you also make mistakes or wrong decisions, which went maybe even into a composition? Can you see that or feel that, and are you happy with that, or how is that going?
There's always stuff that could be better. I can't say I'm a composer at the level of like the great composers, Mozart, Beethoven, and so forth, but some performers really worry about these long dead composers while they're performing. And I have to say, I feel like I have enough experience to know, hey, they were working fast, they wrote it this one time, they'd be happy you're playing it, do what you want, you know. That's more my experience of the real world of music making. And if you get to tour something, if you write something, you get to tour it, then you get to hear it for a while, and then maybe you'll make some changes. I heard today, the first time my piece Solve for X, and there's one aspect of it I'm not sure if it's working all the way. After I hear it in performance, with performance energy, I'll know whether I want to change it for the next time I get to do it.
Okay. Well, there's so much music on this planet. It seems even to be increasing somehow. What do you think is music, and why is music such a big connector?
Unless you have lyrics, music is abstract. It's possibly the most abstract of the arts. You know, we tend to relate to everything through our eyes first and foremost anyway. But music, it's impossible for it to have a message, really, you know. So I think because of that, there's room for people to discover themselves in listening to it, you know. So I think that's why it can connect, is that there's so much room for the listener to put themselves in the piece somehow.
Yeah. Interesting is also that music is also invisible.
Right.
I mean, that's unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at the moment you are writing a book about how you understand jazz.
Yes.
How do you understand jazz?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this book. I don't know if I'm writing all the time. I've written so much already, and I'm going to write a lot more. I was really thinking about a proper history book, but I don't know if I'll actually do that because I need to get really all the way in there. But you have a lot of people to satisfy if you're trying to be a historian. You know, there's nothing I've written ever that someone didn't complain about. You know, when I'm trying to be sort of objective. So I'm sort of tiring of being objective, and maybe I'll actually write something really subjective about it. You know, more like a memoir about my history in the music, because I think it could be funnier and more scandalous. You know, but for the time being, I'm still producing articles about jazz, and I've certainly learned a lot working on these pieces. But in addition to all the interviews I've done major overviews of Bud Powell, Thelonious Monk, Lester Young, Ornette Coleman, James P. Johnson, Herbie Nichols. There's a lot of people I've looked at in a fairly in-depth way on my website, and it's pretty unprecedented as far as I know for a performing artist to actually be that interested in showing their work. In a sense, I'm showing my work like a paper in school. Here's my paper on Bud Powell. Something very corny about it. Some musicians think I'm ridiculous to do it. You know, but for me it seems to work out. And then if it helps or some people, or you know, then it's cool.
Okay. Well, can you tell me a little bit about your idea of time and staying in time and rhythm in all your compositions, for example? Is time in music a mathematical puzzle? How does it work, actually?
Right. Well, I've heard that the first rhythm was the heartbeat. You know, we're always surrounded by rhythm because there's no way you can not hear your heartbeat. If everything went to total silence, you know, you'd hear your heartbeat, a pulse. Pulse seems very important. In jazz, we're dealing with the African tradition, black music, sometimes they call it, and that they're the specialists in rhythm. That's like the highest version of the stuff, at least from what I know. Of course, there's music from India, there's music from other places, but on the slave ships in Middle Passage, they came over, forced over to America, Africans, and they brought with them all the secrets of rhythm. And America benefited immeasurably from this injection of this hardcore rhythmic science, or whatever it is, art, mystical, who knows? I can't tell you what it is. And I think it's why in the 20th century, American music dominated the world, is because we had our old world European harmony. We didn't forget it, at least we didn't forget it entirely. But it was all powered by this African rhythm. It's not my best thing. Rhythm is something I'm still working on. I'll always be working on it, I can tell. I'm more naturally gifted at harmony. From the time I was 12 or 13, harmony had no mysteries for me. Show me a piece of paper with harmony on it, I'm like, I know what this is. Rhythm, that's not the case. I've been working on it, and I'm still going to be working on it.
Good. Well, you work also with Billy Hart, the drummer, at least since 3 albums you recorded together on ECM records. What did you learn from him the most? Can you tell me about that?
Well, he's my most important teacher, I would say. In his way, more important than the piano teachers. It's certainly a lot about rhythm, but just about whatever this is we call jazz, every side of it. But when the Bad Plus had our surprise breakout, I wanted to keep connections to the New York jazz musicians, because I could already tell this was going to be a dividing line. Like I was going to be taken out of the New York scene because of the power of the Bad Plus and the career. And I had met and played with Billy Hart and loved him. I thought, this is my man. I've got to do anything for Billy Hart. And the other 2 people were in that Kurt Rosenwinkel group that I loved. So I put together that first gig with essentially my 2 favorite peers. They're a little older than me, but essentially my peers, Mark Turner and Ben Street, with the master drummer that I knew, Billy Hart. And we played, and it was good, but then Billy had a gig of his own in his town, sort of like a welcome to Montclair, New Jersey, Billy Hart, thank you for living here gig. And he said, well, yeah, I really enjoyed this week with you guys. Will you come play a gig for me? And we played his tunes, and he was on the microphone announcing the band, and it immediately felt much better. That the strongest musician was then the leader. And so we took an internal vote, and we voted to give Billy Hart this band if he wanted it. And he said yes. And that was, that's been together almost as long as the Bad Plus. Now we're about even, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you recently recorded an album with Mark Turner on saxophone. My congratulations for that beautiful album. It's called Temporary Kings, and it's also a recording on ECM records. Did you have to change your style of playing and composing to fit into the ECM aesthetics? And how was the contact with producer Manfred Eicher?
Well, you're raising a very important point, because there is the ECM sound, and Manfred does what he does. I get along really well with Manfred, and I think he's a genius, and I've always loved all my ECM records. But he's been sort of asking me to do a record for a while, and I knew there were plenty of things I was doing that wouldn't be right for him. For example, I was in a trio with Tootie Heath, and I was playing swinging jazz, and I knew this wouldn't work. I didn't even mention to him ever. But in the Billy Hart quartet with Mark, there'd sometimes be these duo spaces over these years, so like these rubato, saxophone, piano spaces, and they were always really enjoyable. And I thought, well, maybe this could work for ECM as duo, chamber jazz. And we recorded at this beautiful studio, Lugano, at the radio center there. We got a lot of reverb. You do that, and it's about 11 seconds later, it finally dies down. So it really works out for this record, because there's no drums on Temporary Kings. We can have this sort of space. And I play something on the piano, it's extraordinary piano, and so well recorded. Play a sound, and it has this resonance, and then the saxophone has a sound, and it has the resonance. And I think it really kind of worked out for an ECM album. Manfred is opinionated, and one of the funny moments of this session is I wrote a kind of something that to me sounded like classical music for the duo. I thought he was going to love it. It was very melodic. I was very proud of this piece. And we did a take, and we went to go in and look at him, and he had his head down like this, and he looks up and says, we can't put this on a record. Like, he's choked up. He's like, he can't believe that we were playing this piece. I just started laughing, and I was like, Manfred, I thought you were going to love this piece. Why don't you like it? And I think it had something to do with appropriating classical music in a way he thought was really corny. So I said, okay, fine, let's not put it on the record. So I really misread him in this moment, because I thought he was really going to dig it. I still thought it was a good piece and used that movement as the middle portion of a piano concerto I wrote. And it was very successful. And in the review of the paper, it cited it as the highlight of the piece, this middle movement. So I think I was really right. But it was cool not to use it for the duo. That was fun.
Okay. Well, can you tell me a little bit about the titles of this album? How did you create Temporary Kings? What's about that?
Yeah, I borrowed it from someplace else. I borrowed it from a British writer called Anthony Pohl, who wrote a sequence of 12 books, A Dance to the Music of Time. And I really love these books. I've read them many times. And my wife loves them too. It's almost part of the fabric of our marriage at this point, this love of these books. It's very hard to explain unless you've read these books why they're so great. But if you read them and loved them, then you're in a certain team and you understand each other. Temporary Kings is actually an old myth about being left in charge of the kingdom while the king goes away, and when he comes back, he probably has to kill you to reclaim the throne. You know. But maybe it's worth it to be actually king during this time. You know, it's so great to be king. It has something to do with that, especially in relationship to being in this beautiful studio with Manfred Eicher and this beautiful piano, and maybe the end of the record industry. I mean, I know we aren't making records that much longer, not CDs, you know. We thought 30 years ago we're making CDs forever. Now we know it's not going to be true. Mm-hmm. So the title reflects all of that, I guess.
And how did you decide which song will be the first, which one will be the second, and so on?
Manfred likes to sequence his records, and I think he likes moody records, and it begins with the two moodiest pieces. I think if it was up to Mark or I, we wouldn't necessarily start that way. But it works. I have to say it works. Kudos to Manfred once again.
So you're happy with the result?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic.
You agree with that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, when you play, do you sing the same moment in your mind? Are you a mind hummer?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. Do you think people in different countries listen differently to music?
It's a great question. I don't really know, but cultures are different, so it makes sense that the listening would be different too.
Okay. Well, New York is a very expensive place. Why is it interesting to live in New York as a jazz musician?
Traditionally, it's just because of the jazz greats that are right there. You know, I get to play with Billy Hart. Recently, I played a trio gig with Ron Carter and Al Foster, and they both just drove to the gig from where they lived. You know, couldn't do that here. I'm not going to get Ron and Al to show up to play with me in the Netherlands anytime soon. You know, so
at least not in the Zuidhorn.
So yeah. Less so about playing with them, really, than also just being able to go see them. When I went to New York in '91, there were still a lot of jazz greats alive that have since died. And I got to see a lot of incredible musicians and drink in some of, you know, what you might call the real deal in terms of people who played jazz live in New York. You know, so that's traditionally the reason why New York is so important.
Good. Well, after this weekend in Zuidhorn here in the Netherlands, you will face some performances with a piece called Pepperland. Please explain this work and what is English in the Beatles.
Right. Yeah, Pepperland is awfully hard to explain because it's a Mark Morris production. I'm back with my old boss, Mark. He's one of the great choreographers, and the city of Liverpool asked him to create a piece in response to 50 years of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And he said yes, and he asked me to write the dance score for it. The Bad Plus was occasionally asked to do a Beatles number, and we always said no because we thought it'd be too corny to do it. In fact, one of the things I like to say still is that there's nothing worse than a Beatles covers project. It seems very trite, cliche. So I took the job very seriously and created this big score with 6 Beatles songs that are sort of deconstructed, sort of like the Bad Plus, actually, early Bad Plus style. And 6 original pieces that are based on what I know of dance and of Mark, and they all reflect, in some little way, they're inspired by a Beatles element. There are some through lines in the music to make it cohere, and then of course Mark's costumes, Mark's choreography, the costumes, the light, it's all a thing. Pepperland is a thing, it's a solid object. It's an artwork that has its own logic. And I think it's very successful, and it's been a hit with audiences. Mark likes to say it's for people who both love and hate the Beatles, you know. And I think the only negative reviews we get are from people who just think the music isn't enough like the Beatles. And to that, my response is, it's sort of like seeing a modern theater group do Hamlet. If you're going to see a contemporary production of Hamlet, they're not going to do it straight up. They're going to do something different with it. You're going to see, I saw the Worcester group do Hamlet. They're modernist New York City play group. I mean, it was incredible. It had almost nothing to do with Shakespeare, but it was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. They can do it with Hamlet because Hamlet's so familiar. I guess my conceit with the music of Pepperland is that the Beatles is so familiar that there's really room to do something different with it.
I mean, Pepperland sounds so beautiful, you know. When I heard about that, I thought, Pepperland, wow, what's that? Did you ever met Paul McCartney or another Beatle?
It's not for them. They wouldn't like it, I guarantee.
You don't know?
I don't know. But
Can you please hum your favorite Pepperland melody for me?
I'm not a very good vocal artist. Let's see here, but...
No excuse.
Da 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 da. Da 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 da.
Beautiful. Next song, please. Well, can you tell me what is sound? What do you understand about sound? Is sound related to where we come from, maybe? And how does New York sound?
I don't have a good answer about either of those things, except that New York it's pretty chaotic. You know, it's actually lovely to be here in this village enjoying some relatively peaceful interlude, you know.
Okay. Well, does silence exist in your life? And how important is silence for you?
I don't think silence per se is that important to me, but I'm not that much of a social animal. I don't like to hang out with a lot of people all the time. So, I mean, I'm a loner in a certain way, although I'm happily married and I do have some friends, a few here and there. Hi, 2 friends of mine out there if you're watching. But no, I like to be alone and think about music and sort of do my own thing. Silence, not so important, but alone time is.
Okay. Well, do you transport the general message in your work?
I think all music must have some kind of extra musical message, but one of the great things about especially instrumental music is that it's up for the listener to decide. I would say that there's very few things I've written that have an explicit message. You know, I made it, I like it, I hope you like it too. Maybe you'll find a message in it for you, but I'm not going to tell you what that message is.
And when does your solo album come?
I don't know. I'm working on solo piano quite a lot, actually. And it's going well. I'm playing more and more solo, and I'm happy in the direction it's going. And I'm playing more and more stride piano, and something like older styles of jazz are coming back in. Stuff I learned first, but I've never forgotten, and now it's starting to sound pretty good to me, something that's happening with the solo piano. I sort of like people like Jackie Byard and Earl Hines and these sort of outre stride piano players. I like that stuff, and I'm playing more and more like that these days.
Well, a piano solo offers you a lot of freedom.
Yes, it does, but it's also very difficult because you have to do it all the time yourself. It's much, in a way, it's easy to feel much more free playing with good bass and drums because they take so much of the load, you know.
Yeah.
If you're playing with a good bassist and drummer, you can play one chord and go for a cigarette break. You know what I mean? The music's still great. Solo piano, you got a deal.
Well, you're also a critic. What kind of critic are you? You're writing for the New Yorker.
Yeah, well, it's not. It's mostly just the old music I like. I rarely write about what's happening now. For plenty of reasons. But I think if you asked people in the scene, they would say, you know, Ethan writes about that historical jazz stuff. And that's sort of the reputation I want to have. I don't really want to have a reputation of, I might review your album recorded now. You know, for the New Yorker, I wrote a little bit about some more contemporary things. A great album by a classical pianist, Vicky Chow, and her recording of Michael Gordon's Sinatra, which I thought was one of the greatest things in recent memory. I wanted to shine some light on it. And then I wrote about this Don Shirley movie and Green Book, and I wrote about the new Doctor Who, but I can't really imagine taking on writing like a lot of contemporary criticism of what's happening. My criticism is mostly about figuring out what happened in the past, because I don't think it's figured out that well yet, if I may say. That's why there's room for me to do what there is to be done, in my opinion, is because if you look at all the textbooks about jazz, and if you read the criticism from years past, I think there are things that are missing and things that they didn't get right at the time. And
like what?
Mainly the musician's perspective. I'll just toss a name out there. Martin Williams, acclaimed by some as one of the all-time greatest jazz critics. When I read Martin Williams, I know he's getting a lot of it wrong, because he's not one of the cats who actually played. And he has a bunch of theories about what he thinks is good in the music that isn't borne out by reality. So he's someone that my work as a writer, I'm in reaction against. I don't want to be with Martin Williams and those guys. I want to be actually more like, I mentioned Billy Hart. Okay, I want to be more like, what does Billy Hart say about the music? You know, let me think about that. Let me write what I think about the music, informed by my experiences having met Dewey, Redman, having been in the Bad Plus with Reed and Dave. Different things that are sort of real world musician experiences that I can maybe address these historical critical issues with a kind of fresh eye.
Yeah. Can you also tell me very short what interests you to interview other musicians? Because on your website there is a huge bunch of material about interviews with other musicians like Keith Jarrett, Billy Hart, and many others. What does interest you to do that?
Well, in almost every case, I really learn something. I'm going in as a student first and foremost. So sometimes I go, when I'm practicing or composing, I actually go back to my own interviews and see what they said about it. You know, with the black jazz musicians, I think they're underrepresented in terms of what their perspective is and the way they talk to each other. As a young white guy, I can't get all the way in there, but I can get in there a lot more than Martin Williams did.
You also met Carla Bley.
Yeah.
You had dessert together with her.
Yes, of course. I wrote about her in the New Yorker too. Well, Carla's always been one of my favorites, and specifically that album, The Ballad of the Fallen, her arrangements for Charlie Hayden. That's one of my top albums of all time. I also love the Paul Bley Trio records where he plays Carla Bley pieces, and I think at one point I thought it was more collaborative than I now know, that Carla really wrote out the scores accurately and Paul played them accurately. She gave him what to play. At one point I think I thought that it wasn't so clearly notated, but it is. I really have that sound inside me, as those early Carla Bley tunes that Paul Bley played.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ethan.
Okay,
I'm very happy we did 1 hour and 1 minute and 22 seconds.
All right, great.
Great.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
your interest. Okay.
You're relieved.
Yes.